Alrighty, who enjoyed the ripple effect and
I'm
Bobby and the amazingness of everything that she is? She's just a ray of sunshine. And yeah, who enjoyed the ripple effect dance? It's pretty cool, right?
I've got a
That,
lot of people loving and liking right now and commenting. So
amazing. Yeah, it's just great to have that positive message in a day and age where, a lot of music and a lot of performance is missing that. Just having that to go out there and send out a good message is really amazing. So I've always really enjoyed that dance, and it makes me feel nice and warm and fuzzy inside.
hmm I'm still just grooving in my own body right now. That rip. Awesome. Okay, well, it is so great to have our next guest bringing a very touching story about his journey as a father, a vulnerable man, and a parent advocate for a journey that will be shared with you very soon. Um, when I had a roster of people that I knew I really wanted to be key fundamentals, but I knew that there was more people out in the world, and so I started doing a little bit more research and just putting that vibration and that prayer out there for whoever really has something to share about this reclaimed topic and this theme. And I was honored to find a group, and this is where I had the chance to see Jason's poster and read a little bit more of his story. And I reached out to him, and he said an absolute yes. We did a video chat and just kind of discovered more about our stories and each other. And when we finished it off, I said, I wish I would have recorded that segment right then, because there was so much that we got to share just in a short amount of time. But we are bringing it right back live to you in action. And welcome, Jason.
Oh, wow. Hello.
It's okay.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me on your reclaimed conference today.
Thanks, Jason, for coming. It's I know we haven't technically met in person, but we have a very common soul that said it was important for us to journey through today, and love you to take the stage. And I'm gonna be here if you're needing any more kind of guidance or things, because I know you've got such a beautiful topic to share, and I'd like you to take it away.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to the Niche Nation for having me. Second of all, thank you and welcome to all of the distinguished guests that are online today watching all of these stories. We all certainly appreciate it. The story that I'm going to share today is about trials, tribulations, loss, and triumph. My family has gone through our fair share of it. And I say that not to say, oh, poor us. It's just this is the life path that we were chosen to be on. And the way I'm going to tell it is not so much a detailed kind of medical side of things, as you'll soon understand, is more of kind of a story version. So back in 2001, I met my wife. We actually met online before it was cool and popular. We got to know each other very well, and we have been together ever since. And then in 2003, we got married. And in between in those 2 years, we kind of talked about what we would want for a family. My wife initially came up to me and said, I would like to have 4 kids. And my first response was, let's have one and then let's talk about the others. Now, that wasn't so much as a far stretch of anything. Then I always thought that we wanted, or at least I wanted, 3, kind of the nuclear family, the 3 kids, the picket fence, the house, that kind of stuff. So we got married, and then about a year after we got married, we got through the honeymoon, and we decided we were going to start having a family. And it didn't take us long, and my wife got pregnant. When we found out she got pregnant, we actually didn't take a pregnancy test. It was actually her hairdresser. The day that we found out she was pregnant, my wife sat in her chair, and her hairdresser said, wow, you look green. Are you pregnant? And she goes, well, we've been trying. I don't think I am. Well, the hairdresser sent her assistant out to go get a pregnancy test that day. She took it, and almost immediately she came back pregnant. My wife called me and told me the good news. We were both ecstatic, and she came home, and we got to talking about it. We were excited, and what this journey was going to bring us. And one of her comments to me was, "Well, what happens if we have a child that has medical needs?" And my almost immediate reaction at that point was, "Well, if we're meant to have one, then we're meant to have one. We'll deal with it as it comes." Apparently, God heard us and either laughed about that or thought that was a challenge, because he certainly obliged us with that request. And we had a child that had medical needs. Now, backtracking a little bit, up until the point of my son's birth and the week 20 appointment, which is that appointment that you find out the sex of the child, we had no reason to believe that my son had any issues. Everything was going well. All the doctor's visits were going well. We had no reason to believe there were going to be any issues. Well, we get to the week 20 appointment, and which is the ultrasound appointment. And we get in there, and the tech starts doing her job. And my wife and I are playing back and forth of, do we want to know? Do we not want to know? I wanted to know because I was a planner. My wife didn't want to know because, as a lot of women say, this is, life's last great surprise. I want to keep it that way. And so we kept playing back and forth. And the tech got to the point where she needed to find out the sex of the child. And she said, "Do you want to know?" And so we playfully went back and forth. And before we could finish, she goes, "Well, I found an issue. I need to know the sex of your child." And we stopped in our tracks and we said, "Well, can you tell us what the issue is?" Her response to us was, "Well, that's kind of a doctor relayed message. I can't really tell you." And we said, "Okay." And then we came back and said, "Well, can you tell us the sex of the child?" And they said, "Well, you're having a boy." "Well, why did you need to know the sex of the child?" And she said, "Well, if it's what I think it is," she said, "it's rare in girls, rare in boys, and even rarer in girls," and which that caught our attention. From that point, we got sent on to a perinatologist, which, for those who've never seen one, is basically a high risk OBGYN from that point forward. And for the next probably 18 weeks, we kept going to see the perinatologist, and they told us every worst case scenario under the sun. Well, your son's going to be born with one kidney. Your son's going to be born with areas of missing white matter in his brain. Your son's going to be born with hydrocephalus. And they just kept listing and listing and listing. And as you can imagine, as two people that were, their second year of marriage, it's our first child, and we're getting thrown all these different major medical issues. It was a stressful, kind of scary time. So we get to the week 38, and my wife gets induced with a C-section, and we have our child. And at that point, he's born healthy as far as we know. He's wrapped up, and, we look at him for about 20 seconds in the delivery room, and they whisk him away to the NICU at the hospital we're in. It was at that point that I went to the NICU, found my son, and the doctor said, "Your son's been born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome." And my initial response was, "What?" And so he started telling me, and the easiest way to describe it is, my son was born without any abdominal muscles in his midsection of his body. No core abdominal muscle, no oblique abdominal muscle, top or bottom. There was nothing there. The only thing really holding him up was his spine and his back muscle. That was it. So all of his organs, they were kind of free floating under the skin and the fascia that holds the skin there. So that was kind of a shock. And what we later found out was Eagle-Barrett syndrome is also an abnormally large bladder that we had to cath him every 4 hours for the first 5 years of his life. And he was susceptible to urinary tract infections if we couldn't drain his bladder efficiently. Then we found out that Eagle-Barrett syndrome meant that because he didn't have the core abdominal muscles, he didn't have that force and pressure that he could press, like, your breathing on when you need to cough crud up like a pneumonia or a bronchitis situation. And what would happen was he'd get sick in his lungs if we couldn't get it out, which we later learned how to do with machinery. He would ultimately end up in the hospital. And when he ended up in the hospital, he would ultimately end up in one of the ICUs. The NICU, the PICU, or the TICU is what we had at the hospital here on the north side of Atlanta. So we learned very quickly to learn how to do medical procedures and doctor's visits and hospital stays and you name it. So this was the first probably 2 years of his life. And then what they don't tell you about the Eagle Barrett syndrome is that you start learning about all the secondary issues that come along with it, meaning the respiratory related illnesses and some of the medical things that you have to do with that, and the machinery you have to learn, and the specialist doctors you have to visit, and the medications you have to take. And so this was a lot to take in the first 2 years, 3 years of our marriage, as we're learning to live together and we're learning to, do our marriage together. We're having to also learn this wealth of medical knowledge. On top of that, later on down the road, we learned that my son was severely neurologically delayed, which means when he hit 15 years old, he was actually functioning about 7 or 8 years old his entire life. That's just what the delays did. We found out he was epileptic, meaning he had seizures. In fact, his first grand mal seizure was when I was with him at home one day playing with him. He just went into one, did what everybody thinks, the shaking, the jerking. I was with him by myself, kind of freaking out, had to call an ambulance, that kind of thing. On top of that, he was born nonverbal. And even though he could walk on his own with assistance, he couldn't necessarily walk by himself. So he was basically wheelchair bound. Now, all of this is within the first 2 years of our marriage. And all of those secondary issues, the delays, the epilepsy, the nonverbal, wheelchair bound, were all separate. None of them related to each other, and none of them were because of the rare condition, the Eagle Barrett syndrome, that he had. And that's what the first essentially 2 years of our marriage was. Now, after we had our son, we always knew we wanted to have another child. And we told family, and you can imagine some of the backlash that we got from some of our families saying, why would you want to have another child if you've got a child that's got all of these medical issues? I'm a researcher, and I researched everything as much as I could, and nothing told me that because my son had all of those issues that my daughter would have any of those issues. So we proceeded forward within that next year, and almost 2 years to the day of my son's birth, we had our daughter. In the beginning, she was considered normal, if you will, just because we didn't see any delays or medical issues. Well, about 6 months of her in her life, she got tested by one of the occupational therapists in our home. And they basically came back and said, your daughter's delayed. We think you need to see a neurologist. Well, at that point, there was so much going on in my life with all of the medical issues that I had. I didn't take to it well, and I basically told them to get out of my house. From that point, we started seeing the pediatrician who has a special needs child, and she said, I tend to agree with them. Your daughter's probably going to be delayed. And if you're basing her development on your son, she's going to appear normal when in reality, based on normal, data and standards, she's delayed. So from that point forward, we started seeing a neurologist for my daughter. Well, what we didn't realize was coming for my daughter was she was going to develop the exact same neurological delays. She had them severe. In fact, right now she's 16 and she functions probably 7 or 8 years old. She also has epilepsy. In fact, of the 6 different kinds of epilepsy that there's out there, we've seen 4 different kinds of seizure in my house. She's also nonverbal. She's also basically wheelchair bound. So within the first handful, 5 years of our marriage, we had 2 kids with almost identical issues, identical syndromes. And this is just kind of thrown into our lap. So as you can imagine, the first 5 years of our marriage, 6 years of our marriage was um, up and down, meaning from just what we had to deal with our kids. There was a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of doing one thing and not going right, doing another thing and not going right, and kind of getting a third option and that finally working. In fact, my son was more medically fragile of the two, and within the first 6 years of his life, he was literally in and out of one of the ICUs at my local children's hospital every 6 months for the first 6 years of his life. In fact, we kind of totaled up all of our insurance statements for the first 5 years of his life. And if we hadn't have had private insurance and government aid, we would have probably been $5 million in the hole in the first 5 years of his life. So as you can imagine, the stress and just the weight that it puts on a family's shoulders with just one child, let alone two. And that's what we are faced with in the first 5 or 6 years of our life. Now, from year 6, which we had a major reconstruction surgery for my son, we didn't really have any more issues throughout his life. Now, we had some minor things here and there that we had to go to the hospital for, and we had one major surgery because both of my kids needed spinal fusion surgery, and both of them had that surgery in either 2019 and 2020, I believe, is the years that they had it. In which that was a major surgery unto itself because they both had spines that had curved almost 90 degrees or more in their body because of the issues that they had. Now, fast forward a couple of years, from 2006 until 2022 almost, my son had no real major issues. We made it through COVID okay, even being susceptible to respiratory related illnesses. And even with me bringing it into the house unknowingly, my son never caught COVID, never tested positive for it, whereas I did and my daughter did, but my son and my wife did not. So that was a very scary time because at the time that I brought it in the house, we didn't really know a whole lot about it. And I thought, Lord, I brought this into my house. I don't know how this is going to affect my son who's already susceptible to respiratory related illnesses. I hope this doesn't gravely affect him. Luckily, he never got it. We never had that issue. That was 2020. Fast forward until right about the end of 2022. On the 25th of January of January 2022, my son and my daughter had come home, and I got them ready. I got them in their loungewear so that they could play, and I started cooking dinner. I made a favorite meal. Fed both of my kids, put my daughter to bed. My son ate like a horse. And then typically what we would do is we would bring my son into the bedroom to have some one-on-one time for about an hour. We did that. We brushed his teeth, and he threw up a little bit that night. And we both looked at each other, my wife and I said, well, maybe you went a little bit too far back with the toothbrush. You hit his gag reflex. Something just came up that was still in his throat. Didn't think much about it. Put him to bed, thought everything was okay. Well, that night he was up and down all night, which was unusual because he was a great sleeper. At the time, I was a stay-at-home parent, so that next morning I, texted his teacher because he was in a self-contained classroom and said, "Hey, my son's, I think, got a 24-hour virus. I'm gonna keep him home. I don't want to spread anything. I'll let you know about the next day." She said, "Okay, fine." Got him up the next day, let him lounge. He absolutely refused to take a nap all day long. And I knew he was tired because he hadn't slept much the night before. And I kept telling my son, "Buddy, you're going to be okay. I'm just sitting on the couch. I'm not going to be doing anything interesting. I'm going to be on my laptop." He absolutely refused to go to sleep. As in hindsight, and I'll explain what I mean by that, it was almost like he was trying to tell me something, but I didn't catch it in the moment. He didn't really want to drink a whole lot, which didn't really surprise me. And I thought, well, if he goes a second day without drinking, that's going to catch my attention. Got through the rest of the day, got him about their bedtime. And so instead of keeping him up, I put him in bed the same time as his sister. He got quiet instantly. And I just thought he was exhausted because he'd been up for like 30 hours at that point without really sleeping. Didn't think much about it. Texted his teacher overnight, said, "Hey, tomorrow's Friday. I'm going to keep my son home again. Don't know what he's got." I said, "He's still not feeling well." I said, "If worse comes to worse," I said, "it's another day. We'll have the weekend. He should recover by the end of the weekend. And then I'll send him back on Monday." She was great. She said, "Okay, fine. See you Monday." Got my daughter off to school, got her dressed, got her in her wheelchair, got her braces on, got her on the bus, waited until about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I went into my son's room. Typically, when I would open the door and behind me, you can see a Z on the wall. This is his room. I would come in here and he'd get really excited. He'd bounce and be happy to see me and giggling and doing his kind of happy squealing when he saw me. I opened the door to come in this room and he just kind of looked at me and he was quiet. He didn't really bounce. And I thought, that's unusual for him. And I walked over to the other side of the bed and I looked at him, and coming out of the right side of his face was this dark green streak of just fluid. And I looked at my wife and said, "The only thing dark green that comes out of the body is bile. And why is it coming out of his mouth?" So I go to get him out of his bed. He's kind of floppy, which didn't really strike me as off because that's happened before when he got really sick with a respiratory illness. I get him in the living room. I go through my protocol, like I cath him to get drain his bladder to make sure it's not that. I listen to his chest to make sure it's not that. I feel all around him, and I was just like, I can't see anything. The only thing that's out of the ordinary is the fact is his midsection is rock hard, like brick wall, cinder block wall, rock hard. He was still really floppy. He wasn't really responding to me a whole lot. I mean, he was aware, but he wasn't his normal self. And it was just a hunch. I looked at my wife and said, "I'm getting him dressed. I'm taking him up to the local children's hospital." And she said, "Okay." So I get him in his chair, I get him in the van, and I'm doing 90 miles an hour up to the local children's hospital. While I'm going up there, he looks like he's fading in and out, like he's trying to fall asleep. And I'm snapping my fingers at him going, "Buddy, stay with me," because I don't know what's going on. And kind of like with a concussion, you don't want him to fall asleep just because of some of the secondary things that can happen if you do that. And what I didn't realize in the moment was he was actually dying in my van at the moment. And so I get up to the hospital, I get him out of the van and put him in his chair, and he's really floppy. I get up to the ER and I skip the line. And before I can get to the desk, the security guard comes over to me and goes, well, he kind of gets on, he's coming over to me to kind of like get on to me, like, "You need to get in line." And I look right at the security guard, and without skipping a beat, I go, "I don't think he's breathing. I need help immediately." So he snaps his fingers at one of the ER nurses. She looks at me and she goes, "Follow me." I've been in this hospital 100 times. This is the first time I've gone at a full run back into the ER to a trauma room. So we get into the trauma room. I instinctively, get him out of his chair. I put him on the table in there and I back out of the way and hope that they'll let me stay in the ER trauma room because my son's nonverbal and he can't tell them anything. Luckily, they do. They move his wheelchair out, and there's another trauma room that's open that nobody's in, that the doors are open, so I back off in there. Well, they immediately cut off his clothes. They intubate him. They put a tube down his throat to get oxygen in his lungs. At one point, they drill something into his knee. What I later found out was like a port or something to get like antibiotics or something into him. Now, understand at this point, they had given him no medication, no pain meds, nothing. They drilled something into his knee. Most normal people would have come off the table at that point because of just the excruciating pain. He didn't flinch. And even though I'm seeing this in the moment, it just doesn't register with me. So as I'm waiting there, the head ER doc comes over to me and goes, "Explain to me down to the minute how long he's been this way." I tell her that. She goes and barks orders at the different people that are around my son. And then she comes over to me and goes, "Explain to me what the scenario was as to why you brought him up here. What was he experiencing?" And I told her. And then she went back and barked more orders off to the people in the room. Well, at this point, they've been doing chest compressions on my son for probably 15 or 20 minutes. Even still, with me watching this in the moment, just listening to different things and what they're saying and what they're doing, it doesn't register to me that this is a very serious situation. So for about the next 5 minutes, they're doing chest compressions, and all of a sudden I see them getting the paddles out. Well, in the old days, it was the ones they put the gel on, they rub together, and they yell clear. Now it's just kind of pads they put on you. They put the pads on him, they yell clear, and he literally launches off that table like a medical drama. Now, as a side note, I'm watching the monitor because when I was always in the hospital, I was watching pulse and breathing rates and oxygen levels. And I watched the monitor, and after they shock him, it literally beeps once and goes right back to what it's doing. At that moment, I go, he's not coming back. Now, understand, even though I'm thinking this in the moment, I'm still compartmentalizing because I've got to take all this in, and then should he not actually come back, I have to relay this to his mother, my wife. I have to relay this to my parents. I have to relay this to her parents. And so, as devastating as this may be, I have to stay clear-headed to be able to relay the message. Well, the ER doc shocks him probably 5 more times, and it's the same scenario. And she finally comes over to me and goes, we could shock him again, but I think the same outcome would be the same. And I said, whatever you think is professionally necessary. And so she does. They pronounce him. She comes over and, says, I'm sorry for your loss, and offers condolences. And at that point, I'm just kind of stunned. I walk into the other trauma room. I have a moment, and then I kind of compartmentalize, and I call my wife. Now, my wife at this point is working from home. She's thinking that we're going to do our standard. I go to the hospital. He gets admitted. We're there 7 to 10 days. I come home. I now have to call her and tell her that her son, who was alive 2 hours ago, is now dead on the table. And I cannot tell you that I cannot tell you the sound that she made that I will never forget on the other side of that phone. She got done having her moment, and I said, talk to your boss, leave work, call your parents, have them drive you up here, which is what she did. And then I called my mother, and I'll never forget her response. And I, telling her what's going on. And at that point, I hang up the phone, and the care team comes in, and she goes, I'm sorry for your loss. And I literally look at her and go, this is going to sound cold and harsh, but I don't mean it to be. And I point at my son and I go, I'll deal with him in a minute. I need to know these answers. And she said, well, what do you need to know? And I rapid fire off like 12 questions. And she literally takes a step back. And I said, I don't mean to be harsh, but I said, information will help me in this moment. And so she gets all the information. She said, well, we're going to talk to the coroner first. I'll come back and let you know his decision on what he wants to do. And so she does. And I'm sitting there with my son, and I'm waiting on my wife and her family to come up. And the first thing that I notice is how cold my son gets. I mean, it's no more than about 10 minutes after he is deceased that like he's ice cold. And that catches my attention. My wife comes up, his mother and her parents come in, and we're there for another hour. And then we decide to leave because, we've got to make funeral arrangements. And the hardest thing I had to do in that moment was I had to pile up all of his cut off clothes, put it on his empty wheelchair, and wheel it through this hospital that I'd been in 100 times. Go down to my van, put it in my van, and drive 60 miles home in dead silence. Like, my wife and I were in shock because from the time he woke up that morning to the time he was pronounced was 2 hours. That's it. It was that fast. And so we had to process what was going on. Now, I didn't really have a moment of breaking down until As I've said, I'm in his room with the Z on it. When I came into his room and put his chair in the corner, which it has not moved since that day, almost 3 years ago, I broke down. I lost it. I just uncontrollably, kind of a gut punch, knees wobbly, that kind of scenario. And at that point, we said, well, we got to go over to my parents' house because my whole family had come over to my folks' house. And we went over there, and I walk into the house, and my brothers and I, we have a relationship. Do we see each other all the time? Not necessarily, but I walked in and I saw my eldest brother, and I don't know what it was about that, but I walked into my mother's room, and he came over to me, and I just lost it for a minute. Don't know why. It hit me like a ton of bricks. So I had to explain everything that was going on, trying to get through that to my family. And that afternoon, I went to do the funeral stuff. And long story short, for the next couple of days, I had to do funeral stuff. And the next week, we had the funeral service. You had your, what I would call, funeral fanfare, where you have people check in on you for the next week or two, and then that kind of dies off. And my wife and I are left to, what do we do now? Because we were still kind of in shock at that point, which was kind of the middle of February, if you will. Now, I'm a big proponent of therapy. I always have been. And right after this happened, I called my therapist and said, I need an emergency session. Can you fit me in? You'll understand when I talk to you. And she did. And I told her everything went on. And from that point, I saw my therapist probably for another year. Now, as the name of this conference is called Reclaimed. At that point, when my son had passed away, I had lost my identity because I was his 24/7, 365 care for 15 years. And 12 of those years, I was a stay-at-home parent caring for him. So when my son passed away, not only did I lose my son, I lost my identity, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Those that are special needs parents will, especially if you've lost a child, when you go from all you ever do is constant care and attention to a specific person in your family, when you lose that, you don't know what to do with yourself because you've got so much free time. I decided to start going back to therapy because I knew this was going to be a long road. I saw my therapist or counselor for about 6 weeks. And after about 6 weeks, she looks at me and goes, have you ever thought about journaling? And the ironic statement I made from her saying that to me was, I'm not a real big journaler. I don't know really how good I am at writing. So I don't know if that's something I want to do. And she looks at me and says, well, you don't have to necessarily do it right now, but put it on the back burner, set it on your side table, so to speak. You can pick it up at any point. She said, why I'm asking you to journal is because it's a mindfulness activity. It basically gets these feelings off of you and onto the page versus just sitting on you. And I said, okay. Well, I resisted it for 9 months. Didn't want to do it. Didn't want to think about it. Nothing. One day I'm on Facebook and I'm, looking at reels and all that. And I watched this reel, and it's got nothing to do with kids or medical or special needs or anything, but there's something in the sentiment of this video that I watch. It just hits me like a ton of bricks. And I just start sobbing sitting in my seat on my couch. And at that point, that idea popped back up into my head. And I, in Oxford English style, writing a letter, I wrote, date, dear Zachary, and I just verbally vomited on a page. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I did this several times a day for weeks. And I kept writing them, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with them, but I saved them on my computer because I thought maybe at one point I want to go back and read these just to see if I've changed or just remember the feeling as to be a connection, that type of thing. And in that time, like everybody, I got on Facebook and searched for groups of people that had lost children. Well, unbeknownst to me, I found a group called Parents Who Had Lost a Special Needs Child, which is weird that I found it because it's a very niche group of grief and a niche group of like child grief. And I was glad I found it and got into the group. And like anybody that's in a grief group or any group, you know that it's probably 99% women and 1% men. And even those 1% of men that are in there, they kind of lurk, they read, but they don't really interact. So I got to know the admin there very well. And one day I said, "Do you mind if I post a journal entry in here?" And she said, "Sure, we'd love for you to, because we rarely or never get men in here doing that." So I decided to post the journal entry. And right before I hit enter, in my head, I thought, am I ready for the response I may get? Because even though this is a noble thing to write on, it's still the internet and I may still get a negative reaction. And I thought, am I in the headspace to do this? I still did it anyway. And no more than I posted it that afternoon, I got a massively positive response. I had mothers and wives and girlfriends and sisters all comment to say, "This is a great letter. We have never crossed paths. We don't know each other. I have never told anybody what's deep down inside. And this letter explains how I'm feeling exactly word for word in the moment," which was very touching to me. And I told many of them, I said, "That's great. I'm glad I could write something that resonates with you. Um, and I'm glad that it was something that my son inspired me to write." So I continued doing this for several weeks. And after about the sixth or seventh week of doing it, I think, hey, maybe I have something here. And for those that, write or in these groups where you do writing or these specific topics, typically, if they think you're good at it, you'll get the, "Have you ever thought about writing a book? Have you ever thought about doing a podcast? Have you ever thought about," they list your typical 3 or 4 things. And initially I said, "I don't know if I'm in the headspace for a book or a podcast." And they went through several other things. And finally, someone said, "Have you ever thought about doing a Facebook page?" And I thought, "Well, what's that?" And they said, kind of like you go to Home Depot per se, and Facebook has a page for it. You just post your content. And I thought, well, I could do that. And someone said, "Well, you don't really have to create more material or newer material. You could just share what you already have." And I thought, well, I could do that. And so I started doing that and inviting people into it. And I had your standard 10 or 20 people in the beginning, friends and family that were following it. And after a short while of doing it, I started reaching out to big names in the grief community and said, "Hey, my name is so and so. This is what I'm doing. Can you give me pointers?" And those people said, "Well, sure." They said, "Well, if you want to do, eventually write a book, you're going to need to have a website and you're going to need to do A, B, and C. If you're going to do a podcast, you're going to need D, E, and F. This is what you want to do. This is what you want to do to get, the broadest audience," that kind of thing. And as soon as I started doing that, I was getting like 30 and 40 followers a day. It blew up for me because I started getting more and more people seeing the page that I was writing on grief and its emotions. I say this not to toot my own horn or not that I'm anything greater than anybody else. I think the draw to my page is the fact that I'm a man willing to share my emotion about a very sensitive and devastating topic. And one of the ways that I'm trying, or I have reclaimed kind of my purpose in life, was when I realized that I was getting such the positive response to the grief emotion that I was sharing, which was very raw, very open, not sugar coated at all, was the fact that I'm one of the few that's willing to do it. I'm willing to be vulnerable in front of the world to say, "Hey, you are not alone in these feelings," or whatever there's feelings, which I've gotten several questions recently about it, in that, is this normal in, say, the first 6 months, the first year of grief? And, I could come back and say, yes, that's very normal. Yes, that's something I did. I've been there, done that. Yes, that's something several people I know have done. So I'm there to be kind of a grief support community. So from that point, I created what the Facebook page and website called Letters to Zachary. This community is a Facebook page, a Facebook group, and like I said, a website. This is for me to post the letters that I write in hope that it will resonate with others so that they can latch on to something in the sense of that they're not alone, that someone else feels what they feel. It's also somewhere where I write outside of letter form in poetry form or prose form. I do memes on there that are grief related. I do commentary on other people's work, at least from the male perspective. I wanted to create this community, at least in the beginning. It started off for just men because I couldn't find any men willing to open up, and it was just frustrating me. In its evolution, when even though I was getting men in there, I thought, well, I want to broaden this to as many people as possible. So after a couple of months, I opened it essentially to everybody. And it's going to sound odd, but I opened it up to women last. And what I mean by that is I opened it up to men in the beginning, but I got the real feeling that even though men are coming to my page, I wasn't getting a lot of interaction. The reason why I opened it up to women last was because my thought was, if a man's not willing to interact with me, at least maybe his significant other will find what I'm writing on here. If they find something that resonates with them, they will then kind of backdoor share it with that person, their husband, their brother, their significant other, whomever, and they will get the information to help them kind of in a backdoor way. And so that's why I opened it up to literally everybody on the page. And from that point forward, growth of Letters to Zachary just kind of blew up. I'm currently almost about 1,200 followers. I've done podcasts all over the world. My goal with Letters to Zachary is to be kind of an all-in-one grief community and hopefully help as many people as I can, especially men, deal with emotion. The other caveat to my Letters to Zachary is I'm here to empower women to understand men in the emotional state of grief. I want them to understand how men deal with emotion and how women can help their men to open up. Um, in fact, I came up with what I call the male grief commandments, and it's basically 10 points that I feel like would have worked on me while I was deep in the initial grief that I was dealing with, that I share with other women to say, hey, this may not work on every man, but it may work on the majority of men out there. If your man is not opening up, here are some things I feel like you can do that will get him in a situation or scenario to help him open up. Like, get him in a space where he feels like he's safe to open up. For men, even though some may think we're complicated, we're not. For men, it's all about respect and feeling like we're important. That's it. If you get into a situation where the man doesn't feel like his opinion is being respected or it's not important, he's not going to open up to you. If you get into a situation where the wife or the woman's feelings are more important than the man, meaning the man's going to think, why am I going to open up if my feelings are always secondary to yours? Now, this is nothing personal against women out there, but what I try to tell women is, if you want your man to listen to you when you're just venting to get things off of your chest and for us to not fix it, because men are typically fixers, then you need to be able to do the same thing with your significant other. And I would say probably 90% of women out there probably do that. But for the 10% that doesn't, if you're wondering why your man doesn't open up, those are one of the reasons why. So Letters to Zachary is for men, for children, for women, for anybody that has lost a significant person in their lives. For me, I'm a little more geared towards losing a child, but that doesn't mean I won't do my best to help someone that's lost a brother, a sister, a parent, a husband, a wife, that kind of thing. I'll do what I can. And if I can't do it, I know a lot of people in this world that I can direct you to help you deal with those emotions. On top of Letters to Zachary, I decided about in August of this year, I wanted to create something tangible that I could hold in my hands to create a physical legacy for my son. So, what I decided through the help of the Belmont City Press was I made a grief coloring book called Letters to Zachary. And the reason why I made it was a couple of reasons. First of all, my son's sister is still around. So I thought, how am I going to explain death and grief to his sister, who, even if she was neurotypical, would have a hard time dealing with it? Now that she's not neurotypical and dealing with developmental delays, how am I going to explain these thoughts, these feelings, these deep concepts? So I came up with a grief coloring book, and the sentiment behind it was every page in there is a full coloring book page that someone can color. And then on the back of the page, every single page in there, now the first probably 5 in there are mine because I'm the namesake of the book. But after those first 5 pages on there, literally every page after that is someone I have met in the grief community currently who has lost a loved one, whether it be a child, a brother, a sister, that kind of thing, in the book. And on the back of those pages, it lists something positive about the child, something they liked, a favorite quote, a favorite statement, who the child was, and kind of what part of the country or the world that they're from. The coloring book pages, basically what happened was I created a survey, they filled it out, they sent it to the publisher, and the publisher, based on all the attributes that they gave the publisher, the illustrators came up with either a coloring book scene or a collage, if you will, that all collaborated all of their attributes into one coloring book page. So let me find one quickly. For example, here's one. This person, his name was Austin. He liked cars. He liked motorcycles. There's the baby feet from the mother. There's a nice saying down below. And you can't see it, but in the watermarked area, there's several different things in there that people can color that are Austin's favorite things. So I did this because I wanted to make it a legacy, and I wanted to make it a tribute to not only my son, but to all of these other families' sons, so that we could have something on what I would call the life bookshelf that would outlast us all. That's why I decided to create it. Last but not least, I created it because I wanted to create a living, interactive, and active memorial for not only my family, but all of those families and the families that have lost loved ones currently, or who may lose them in the future, unfortunately, is the reason why I created it. If that's something that interests you, you can go to my website, letterstozachary.com. It's the 3rd or 4th section down, where I've got a link where you can go to the Amazon website. It's $14.99 for those that may be interested, for the coloring book. Honestly, at the end of the day, Letters to Zachary is helping me to reclaim not only my purpose in life, but it's helping me to reclaim as much happiness as I can in this life. Yes, his loss was very devastating. Yes, grief will last my lifetime. And even though right now I may be putting on the mask like nothing's wrong, and there's no emotion there, make no mistake about it, I still have a lot of very difficult moments here and there dealing with the loss of my son. In fact, I had one a couple of days ago that was pretty tough to deal with. It just kind of hits me out of the blue. But Letters to Zachary helps me to reclaim as much happiness as I can, being in a lifelong state of grief. And the thing that makes me happy, the process that I get into, the creation of the letters, the interacting with others that may have lost a loved one, whether it be a child or otherwise, the doing the podcast to get the word out there that people are not alone in this process. And I know it sounds crazy that someone may think they're alone, but when you're initially in the state of grief, all you think about is your small little world. We all know that nobody's going to get out of this life alive. Everybody faces it at some point. But when you're in the midst of it, you don't think about that. And what my page is here for is to tell men you can be emotional without ridicule, without it getting thrown back in your face, without any, laughing at you because you're being, you're crying, you're sobbing because you've dealt with the most devastating thing a parent can deal with or a significant other can deal with. It's also here because I want the women that have lost loved ones in their life to feel the same way, to feel like there's someone out there that gets them, that understands them, and to help them connect with their significant other, the men in their lives, so grief doesn't put a wedge in between them. Because the reality of grief, of losing a child, I think the statistic is like 70% of families that lose a child end in divorce. It's a very high divorce rate. And I'm here to let people know that you're not alone. You don't need to go down that path. There are people that you can talk to. There are scenarios that I can help you with. And if I can't help you with, I have a vast repertoire of people that I can guide you to help you with that. You don't need to go down that road, especially when you get to those dark moments of grief. And those of us in the grief world, we've all had those moments. So in a nutshell, Letters to Zachary was created out of a passion project and love of my son to create a legacy for him that will hopefully outlive me and my entire family.
Jason, just hearing it, just that full capacity again, it hits my heart so deeply because when I was in school, I had one of my teachers, her son was in the same boat as Zachary.
Mm-hmm.
And have that compassion, and we loved Keegan. He was just a great soul. And
Mm-hmm.
To journey through that, they're not, just because there's maybe this disability or non-access of voice or connection, they are such a pivotal spirit and a joy.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to finish our conversation, in my line of work, I connect with the loved ones, and this is exactly what honors that legacy, that spirit, like you said. And with all of it, I'm trying to wipe away all the tears that I can right now, because it's just so impactful that men like you can just show that those tough times, people can bring that awareness. So thank you so much for today.
Sure. And, the funny thing about men don't like being told what to do. But when it comes to emotion, they let the world tell them what to do. And the other thing I would say about men is most men never want to be first doing something. But if they see another man doing it, they'll jump into the water with them. And so, as I told you when we initially talked, if that means I've got to dive into the ocean because someone wants to follow me, then I'm diving in head first. And that was another one of the reasons it pushed me to do it, because I got so, I think I told you in our initial conversation, was honestly the reason why I created Letters to Zachary was just out of spite, and because I couldn't find any other men out there that wanted to open up. Maybe they didn't have the exact same scenario I did, but I wanted them to at least be in the same ballpark, and I couldn't find them. And so instead of me complaining about it, I was just like, well, instead of complaining about it, I might as well do something about it. And that's kind of what got the ball initially going after I started writing to create it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just like, this is why we have the Niche Nation, and why Brody and myself are just about bringing, like you said, so many people think they're not alone. And
Mhm.
you nailed it on the head about the funeral fanfare, is
Yeah.
that it's hot and heavy for the first 2 weeks. Maybe you can stretch it out for a month, and then
Mhm.
every annual, everybody will talk and process
Yep.
it. But what about the rest of the 360 days, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
so much more to that journey. And I'm very honored that you stated, just recently it's been a little difficult for,
Yeah.
comebacks. And we're still dealing with, this isn't just PTSD, this is CPTSD.
Mhm.
This is a reoccurring chronic layer
Yep.
that we, as caregivers and providers for so many things, that when we have no more role, and it's not that you don't, because you still have your beautiful daughter still in
Yep.
this journey and on the planet with us, that but there's still not that caliber, there's still those differences to disconnect. And so many people, I've got a lot of people sending out personal messages right now. You are amazing, and this is what we all need to hear, and thank you. I have a sister who is nonverbal, and it's really hard to process out this all by myself. And just, it is good to hear that there's somebody else out there knowing how hard it is behind closed doors about this.
Sure. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm anybody that wants to come to the pages or the website, and I welcome you. If they want to reach out to me on my website, on the homepage towards the bottom, there's a place where you can put in your information and just email me on that page. I do have a chat box, although I'm still a little website illiterate. So if it doesn't quite work, I'm working on it.
No worries. And yeah, like I said, seeing your twist on, instead of it being another self-help book or another something that just collects dust,
Yep.
this is collecting dust of lifetimes. This
Yep.
is something that is going to be as a keepsake, and that's such a beautiful gift back into the rest of the world when it is
Sure.
time for us to, like you said, none of us get out of here alive. So
Yep.
well, Jason, my beaming love back to you. And if you ever need a trip up to Canada and with your lovely family, we would love and honor that, to have you in our homes. Or if we're ever down in the southern border, we'd love to come and visit. And
Sure.
you guys, everybody that you are seeing today as speakers are literally on our roster, who are a part of the Niche Nation Network. This is more stuff, more details, more information we are bringing to you, so that you don't have to always just hear me gabber or always have Brody fix up. It is a whole network, a whole nation worth of people that are ready to help and be that space holder for you in your journey. So thank you for bringing your story. And Zachary, it's been so great to see you in this journey as well, and huge blessings and love to your whole family, Jason.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Anytime.
Yeah, from the male perspective, it's so powerful to see, and you're incredible. You have an incredible power when you share that story, and you had me in tears over here. And it's just so inspirational, just taking a mess to some might seem and turning it into that message.
Mm-hmm.
How powerful that's now echoed out, and how meaningful
Sure.
and fulfilling you've created out of this. And so just that going from that despair to now victory, from victim to victory, is
Certainly.
is a good phrase by Jeremy Lama that he always shares with me too. And I really appreciate that. It's inspiring, it's motivating, and it again is so incredible that you're doing that.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Well, we'll be seeing more of you again soon.
Sure.
Okay.
Take care, Jason.
Cheers.